Our workshop this morning is Living the Program, and our first speaker is Bonnie C. from North Central Indiana.
Good morning. I'm Bonnie. I'm an addict. I stayed up too late, but it's okay. Living the program. I was kind of overwhelmed when I got up this morning because there's just so much. You know, the first thing I thought about is the IP called Living the Program, which has a lot to do with the 10th step. But I started thinking about what our literature says about what is the program. The program is complete abstinence from all drugs, and it's a set of principles written so simply we can follow them in our daily lives. And I really believe this is a 12-step program. I mean, that's why I'm here. It's a 12-step program. There's fellowship, there's service, there's campouts, there's things that go on. But when I think about living the program, it's about the 12 steps. So when I first got here, the first thing I had to realize is that don't use, no matter what. Just don't use. And a lot of it was white knuckling. A lot of it was a lot of different reasons. I remember thinking that, I'd go get help and it wouldn't work, and then my family would get off my back and let me use. But the point was don't use. No matter what happens, don't use. And then it was about going to meetings. I needed to go to meetings. I needed to get connected. I didn't know how to live. I needed to be around people who knew how not to use. And then it was about the literature. I love our literature. I don't look at our literature like laws and bylaws on how we should live. Our literature is the experience, strength, and hope of our predecessors. They're the people who figured out how to don't use no matter what. And all they did was write it down so that we could have it. It's a history of people who lived and people who died so I could be clean today. And when I read our literature, I know somebody lived that. Whatever I'm reading, somebody lived that. And then there's sponsorship. How important it was that I find a sponsor, because I don't know how to live. And even with the literature, and even though I could connect and find me and see me in that book, the addiction part, I didn't know how to do the recovery part. And I needed a sponsor. I needed somebody that I could connect with and who could show me how they live so I could learn how to live. And then it was about carrying the message is another thing we do when we live the program. And I once heard a speaker say that, because as addicts we're so selfish, it's really cool that this program was designed so that for us to keep it, we had to give it away, because we would just take that shit and run. We wouldn't help other people. And so that's one of the neat things about our program. It keeps us from being so self-centered and selfish all the time. And then, it's about service too, about giving back what was given to me. And I remember there's so many people that talk badly about area service. And when I first went to my first area service meeting, I had an immediate chemistry to that. Chemistry is something we feel, attraction something we see. It was chemistry. It took time to be attracted to it, but immediately I felt that, you know what? I don't have to live like that anymore because of these people. And so service, I've always had a chemistry for service. So anyways, I start working the steps. I get that kind of shit going on. And in the beginning, service was just showing up. That's all I did was show up. Made some coffee, put some books on a table. But I get this sponsor and I start getting into those steps. And I had the most wonderful sponsor. And she taught me that the journey was really from the head to the heart to the hands. That I needed to know it, I needed to feel it, and I needed to apply it. And so as a result of working these steps, and you know what? I love that it says working the steps. I had to work them. There was going to be work involved. You know what? No matter how much I stick with the winners, I don't get what they have unless I do the work for myself. Osmosis just doesn't work in this program. It never has for me. So I have to do the work. And so I like to talk about the steps because to me that's how I live the program. And in the beginning it was such a conscious effort to put them in the head, feel them in the heart, and use them to the hands. And today it's amazing to me how if I take a second and stop and look at a situation, the way I was able to apply steps without even thinking about it to get to that next moment and be okay. So I got up this morning and I wrote it down because I thought, you know what, it's such a unconscious thing for me today because I've been practicing this long enough that most of the time I can run into a situation and before I know it, I put some steps on it and I'm okay. Because I'm not going to use no matter what, and that's how I don't use. And, you know, I could also stand up here and I can share with you about what my life's like when I'm not working the program, but we've all been there and done that. I would rather share about how my life is when I am working the program. Now, I believe each of the steps gave me gifts. We call them tools, but I call them gifts because I feel blessed that these things were given to me as a result of the hard work. It's more like a reward. You know? And so what happens in step 1 is that I realize I have a disease. I'm not a bad person, I'm a sick person. I'm an addict not because I use drugs, but because I have the disease of addiction. I learned that powerless means I had no power in my life. I had no God. And that's why I was powerless, because it was all left up to me. And I didn't have any power. And my life was unmanageable because I didn't have any power, you know? It would be like me trying to turn on the light switch with no electricity, you know? There was nothing I could do. And you know what? I didn't ask for this disease, you know? I didn't ask for it. I have it. Why do I don't know. I don't care. The point is I have this disease. And so as a result, now that I have this information about what the problem is, I have this disease, I'm given choices. And, you know, the gift that I got out of the first step was honesty. Just the ability to be honest, to say what's on my mind. I've learned through being here a while that honesty and truth are very different things because the truth is the facts and honesty is how I perceive those facts. And you know, before I worked step 1, I really thought I had a drug problem. And after step 1, I realized I had the disease of addiction. And our literature also says, you know, our disease involves much more than the use of drugs, and recovery is going to involve much more than mere abstinence. So even with that foundation of don't use no matter what, that wasn't going to get me well. Just simply not using drugs was not going to make me well. And so I move into step 2, and, you know, I always thought things had to be the way they were, you know. I'm given that choice in step 1, but I still don't know how to choose it because I think I'm going to always be stuck. And what happens as a result of step 2 is that my mind gets open to the possibility that I don't have to live like that anymore, that I don't have to choose to get high, that I don't have to keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And you know, the greatest part is that I could have power in my life. I could have a God. There was a God that would care for me, you know. And so the gift that I'm given in step 2 is just an open mind. And you know, it's funny because I didn't think I had an open mind when I got here, but I'll tell you what, I sure did, because if you handed me anything and said it'd get me high, I'd take it. You know, and so I really learned how some of these principles I did practice in my addiction, and I could practice them in my recovery too. So I take that open mind and I head into step 3, and I learn how to make decisions. You know, I can make decisions all day long, but if I don't act on them, they're useless. And so what happens in step 3 is I decide I want to live differently. Because of the results that I found in my life from step 2, step 3, I had to make the decision if I wanted different results. And I had to come up with some willingness. And that's the gift that I got from step 3. And what happened is I came to this realization because you allowed me to have a God of my understanding. is I still felt worthless. I mean, I felt better. I hadn't been using, and some of the consequences of using went away, but I still felt worthless, and I still felt like there wasn't a God who'd want me. And what happened in step 3 is I decided that my understanding would be that God was going to care for me, not because of who I was, but because of who my God would be. And that gave me the willingness that I needed to act on the decision to live differently. So then we move into 4. And 4 was just really about taking a look at my life, coming out of denial, telling the truth. The gift I got in 4 was perseverance, because step 4 is some work. Searching, fact-finding, fearless, fact-facing, and it was work, and it took perseverance. I remember when my sponsor told me that you're going to write a life story starting with your earliest memory to today, and I said, you got to be freaking kidding me. That will take forever. You know what? It didn't take forever. I just had to persevere. When I ran into parts of my life where I found myself putting those lies I always told on the paper, and then being able to say, that's not really what happened. And then to write the truth, write the real facts, not the life I was living. And so I had to persevere through that. When I put down that pen and I was in a lot of pain from just coming clear on some things in my life, I had to pick up that phone and I had to talk about it. And then I had to not be afraid tomorrow to pick up the pen and go back at it again tomorrow. And so that was the gift I was given in step 4, was learning how to persevere, how to just get to the other side no matter how hard it was. So then I move on to step 5, and in 5 what I learned is trust. I had to trust another human being. I had to take that shit I put on that paper, not only trust them with the truth about my life, but trust that it was going to help me to share that. And my sponsor used to tell me that, we talk about being as sick as our secrets, and that if I've got a secret and it's making me sick, and I trust you enough to tell you, and you tell everybody, I'm still better off than I was keeping that secret that was making me sick. So now what it is I learned to trust. I learned to trust that my secrets make me sick and I need to expose them. And so I get that gift of trust. Not just trust in other human beings, but trust in this process. When I finished writing that pages and pages and pages of this life story, I just really didn't know how it was going to help. And what happened was it did. And so that gave me that trust that I needed. So then I go on to step 6, and you know what? After looking at that, this is who I am. And I get some self-acceptance. For once, I don't have to pretend anymore. Good, bad, otherwise, indifferent. This is who I am. I get to look at the exact nature of my wrongs, those defects, how I tried to manipulate results through behaviors. And, I really get some acceptance because, not only that, but I found that good shit. I found who I was beneath that disease. Part of writing that life story was looking at how the disease stole me, how it just deteriorated who I was. And, knowing that I was still in there. I was in there somewhere. And so having that acceptance that really, you know what? You guys told me that I wasn't a bad person, I was a sick person, and I finally felt that. I felt, you know what? I am. And so I move on to 7, and 6 is who I am, and 7's, well, this is how I want to live. I don't want to live like that anymore. I want to live differently. And I'm given that gift of humility. Like, okay, this is the good shit, this is the bad shit. God, I don't want this bad shit. Help me do something different. Because I don't know how to do anything different. I couldn't change those behaviors. I needed the help of God. I could make different choices. The one that I think of the most is this job I have today. I'm a boss, and I've always been bossy, but I'd never been a boss. And I realized that I was a dictator. And I don't want to be a dictator. And so applying that step 7 every day on the way to work and saying, God, help me be a leader, not a dictator. Because you know what? Just because I wanted to be doesn't mean that I could be. I needed some help with that. I needed God to remove that from me, and I had to ask for that help and then trust that that help would be there. And so with that gift of humility, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm good, I'm bad, I'm a little bit of everything. What I don't like, I can change. And so I move on to 8. And 8 was about my part in my life. Really, for the first time, up to 4, my life was everybody else's fault. And through 4, 5, and 6, and 7, now I realize that I played a part in my life. I did some messed up shit. And you know what? I really beat myself up about that messed up shit. And so it wasn't just about me being sorry and being entirely ready for that. It was about me being entirely ready to forgive myself. And so the gift that I'm given is forgiveness. Forgiveness is the antidote to resentments. And that's what I learned in 8. All the things I resented about my life and who I was, the minute I forgave myself, do you know what? They went away. And making those amends wasn't about you, it was about me. It was something I did for me. But realizing today that the gift that I gave those people is I helped them come past their resentments on me, because they were able to forgive me and not be sick by the resentments they had with me. And so finding that, just being entirely ready for that. What's really cool is then you go into 9, and I am living differently today, and I'm not doing the things that I used to do. And so you know what? When I did go talk to those people, I could do it with dignity. I could stand up and say, you know what, I'm sorry I lied to you. I'm sorry I cheated. I'm sorry I stole. I'm sorry I manipulated you. I'm sorry I took things from you because I felt entitled to those things. And I could do it with dignity because I didn't live like that anymore. And so that was the gift that I was given in 9, was dignity. Being able to just stand up, dignified, and say, you know what, I was wrong and I'm sorry and I'm not going to do that anymore. And know that those people that I made the amends to believe that because they saw how I was living. And I know right away when I got here, I wanted to say I was sorry to everybody, but I didn't have the dignity it took to do that. Why would they believe me? I used to say I was sorry all the time and it was worthless. But finally I'm able to stand up with dignity and say, I'm sorry, and they knew it. And they knew it and they felt it and I felt it, and it was wonderful. So then I moved to 10, and in 10, what I realized, sometimes I'm going to be wrong, and sometimes I'm going to be right. But the only way I'm going to know is to look at that shit every day. And so I believe the gift that I got in 10 was awareness. But you know what? I'm a human first. I can remember blaming everything on, I'm an addict, that's why I did that. No, I'm a human first. And as a human being, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to make bad choices. I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to be greedy. But you know what? I'm also going to be loving, and I'm going to be caring, and I'm going to be kind, and I'm going to be giving. And so for me is to remember that I'm human first. And if I had that awareness of how my day went, and maybe I don't always act the way that I want to act, I'm able to correct it right now rather than carrying that shit around like I did for years before I get here. I don't have to take a little tiny blister and let it become a big boil. So I'm given that awareness right now of what's making me uncomfortable in my skin and fix it, And so that's what 10 does for me. So then I go to 11 and I find love. I find God's love. I find that, you know what, even though I found this God and I got some trust in this God, I was still manipulating that God because I thought good things happened to good people. And so part of my motive for being good is I wanted good things. And, I just wanted to be loved. I just wanted to feel loved. And in 11, what happened is I realized that the gift that I got, the reward for doing good things, was to feel good. That's why I could feel good in my skin. That's why I don't have to use. Because living differently caused me to feel differently and feel worthy of love. And for the first time, I really felt love for myself and that God loved me. And that's why I can simply ask for God's will. That's because I know God's will for me is to be happy and be loved and feel loved. And so I can have complete and total trust in that. So when I'm talking to the God of my understanding, all I got to ask for is God's will. It's really that simple because I believe that today. I believe God wants me to be happy. And I don't always cooperate with that. And I find myself unhappy, but I know that God's will, God does not test me, God does not put roadblocks, life on life terms. You know what? I created 90% of that. I own a part of that, There's some life on life's terms that I didn't create, deaths, accidents, some things happen and I didn't play a role in that, but 90% of what I want to blame life on life's terms, I played a part in that. Some choice I made, it's a consequence. And so if I just continue to remember to ask for God's will in my life, and I don't always like it because I want something different, but I can trust it today. So anyways, in 12, I get freedom. That's been my new theme right now, because I feel so free today. And free to do what I want, and I'm not going to use. Free to be who I am. Free to be right, free to be wrong. You know what's really cool? Free from your judgment. I can be who I want to be, and it don't matter what you think, And that is incredible because, I spent my whole life figuring out what you wanted and being that. And today I figured out who I am, and that's what I am. And I'm good with it, It's really freeing. There are things I like to do. I love live music. And, I'm free to go listen to live music today. And I want to tell you, I couldn't do this when I was new. Okay, when I was new, I wouldn't do this. But I met this group of girlfriends, and we're sitting in a bar, and we're listening to live music. And these women aren't addicts. They're normies. Normies go to bars, and they listen to music, and their lives still get unmanageable, and they have a power in their life. And I'm sitting there with them. And for the first time in my life, I'm sitting there sipping my Red Bull, and they all know I don't drink. And I felt so free. It was like, wow, I'm comfortable in my skin. I'm okay with who I am. I don't have to put something in me to feel a part of. And it was such a freeing moment. But then God's really cool, because part of 12 too is that I got to share this message. I believe God gave me a message to carry, and that's part of God's will for me. So this group of women that I'm hanging with, and they all know I don't drink, and they all admire that. They can't believe that I have so much fun and I don't drink. And one of them, she ended up getting a DUI. And she calls me. And she's like, I don't know what to do with my life. It's spiraling downwards. I can't seem to control it. And you know what? I carry the message. I let her know she didn't have to live like that anymore. I let her know, and it happened right when I was celebrating my 12 years. And I was able to say, well, you know why I don't drink? This is why I don't drink. This is what my life was like. This is where I found help. You don't, and I was able to offer her that choice that somebody gave me. So I trust that no matter where I go, you know what, God gave me a message to carry, and by God, I'm going to be carrying that message whether I like it or not, And so these steps, by living the program, the more I practice them, because I've been over them again and again and again and again, they're natural now. I don't have to make that conscious decision anymore. Most of it's natural. The only time I have to make a conscious decision is when I'm really experiencing some pain in my life and I want that pain to go away and it requires change. I need to figure out how to go through these and apply this program for that change. And we also have the traditions, and I don't want to go into the traditions, but on that note of freedom, see, these steps taught me how to live with me, and the traditions taught me how to live with you. And I love Tradition 12. I love anonymity. I love that we're all equal. But for me today, placing principles before personalities, again, I have the freedom to be who I am regardless of who you are. And that's what I learned. 12 says, I get to 12 and I find this freedom, and Tradition 12 tells me, now be that. Just be that. Quit letting other people determine who you are today. Just be that. And so that's the biggest freedom to me. Okay, so I'm just going to use one example of my life of what happened. I've lost some weight and I look good, those of you who've known me for a while. And a lot of people are asking me, what did you do? She's taking diet pills. I know she's using again. I don't care what you people think. I know. And what happened is I went on this trip to Hawaii. And my daughter sent me back these pictures, and I'm looking in this picture frame, and I'm like, oh my God, you are old and fat and ugly. And that's how I felt. That is not what I want to represent. Because you know what? I have this freedom in recovery today, and I'm looking at this and I'm like, my God, look at those outsides. And so this is what I had to do. I had to change the way I eat. Because you know what? When I came here and I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, I had to change the way I live. And I learned how to live this program. So when I was sick and tired of being sick and tired of the way I looked, I had to change the way I eat. And that's what I did. You know what? I worked them steps on it. I knew what was unhealthy that I did. I had to make the choice not to do that. I had to ask for help. You know, I didn't want to go on a diet because diets are temporary. I needed to change the way I ate. And it was hard. Don't pick up them cookies. Don't eat that cookie no matter what. You know, don't eat that bag of chips. Don't use. I mean, it was all the same principles. And it took time. And it was slow because you know what? There's no instant gratification when you're changing the way you live. You know, I didn't become comfortable in my skin. It took getting through those 12 steps, which took a couple years to get comfortable in my skin. Then it took several more years of working them and not working them, because I got to find out what doesn't work too, to find the freedom I have today. So it was the same thing. It took time. It wasn't going to happen overnight. And, you know, I didn't weigh myself in the beginning because I wanted it to be about being healthy. Well, today I put a 10th step on it every Monday. Every Monday I check it. And you know what I've learned? When I resort back to old behavior and eat what I want when I want, I put on pounds. And when I practice the program with my eating, I feel good, you know? And so it's just a part of this process of change. And another, you know, I went through a divorce this year. You know, I was married for a long time. I clung to that for a long ass time. Thought if I pretended I was happy, I would be happy. And I ended up getting in a first step and getting honest about things. Realizing how I made him more important than me. Learning that I was never honest in that relationship because I didn't trust it enough to share my feelings and my wants and my needs. And I remember I finally went to a therapist, and she says, you know what, you're a grown-ass woman. You got some great recovery. It sounds like you got a sense of who you are. Why don't you just go be that? Why don't you just go be authentic? Be who you are. And he'll either like it or he'll leave. And, you know, it came down to where he had had enough of NA, and he thought, you know, come on. He could never keep me clean. This program could. So when it came down to making the choice, this is where I want to be, you know. And it's been a struggle because I've never been clean and single. And I took all those using behaviors into that. But I'm learning how to apply the program today and be okay with that. And so living this program is really what I do. You know what? There's parts of me people are going to approve of. There's parts of me you're not, but I don't care. I know I'm not using today, and I feel good in my skin, and I'm grateful. I'm just so grateful, you know, for who I am today. I think that's all I got on this, because I'm like feel like I'm digging for shit. I've never took notes before. That was kind of cool. Just keep coming back. I'm going to tell you what they told me. You don't have to live like that anymore. Whether you're brand new or you've been around a while. If you got something going on in your life that's making you uncomfortable in your skin, live the program and it will change. And that's what I've learned. Live the program. When I live the program, I'm at my best. And when I don't live the program, I can't stand myself, you know? So that's all I got.
Our next speaker is Bud M., also from North Central Indiana.
Hello everybody, I'm an addict, my name is Bud. You know, living the program. It's funny because the life I live is my life. The program I work is Narcotics Anonymous. How I work the program of Narcotics Anonymous, that's between myself, my higher power, and my sponsor. You know, my sponsor has taught me a lot. And you know, when you read the literature, and I love how Bonnie went to the literature because I love that. You know, when I first got in here, I'd hear people say, you know, the literature tells me, and I was like, bullshit. I went and bought a book. And I had people that would show me where to look. And I said, my God, it's in there. And it had all these people wrote this book that was talking about me. And that kind of made me a little self-conscious at first, but then I realized, you know what, it works. I sponsored a gentleman who just became a manager at a fast food restaurant. And every time I call him, you know, I talk to him and he's got a problem. I said, well, it's in the book. Look in this chapter. Not everything applies in life is in that book. Look it up. You know, because I was one of those naysayers for a long time. I can find it in a book. I had to learn to correlate this program to my life. You know, I was here about 3 years ago. We was sitting around a campfire and we was talking, and we just had a little impromptu meeting. We was talking about the steps, and we was asking everybody what your favorite step was. And these people were like, well, I like step 2 because, you know, I get to come to believe. In step 3, I get to turn my will over and all this. And step 4, I get this freedom. I said, I like the 12th step because I get to use all this shit in my life. I get to apply it to all my affairs. You know, when you read the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous, you read how it works. It doesn't say drug or narcotic in it. It's about addiction. You know, and I like to say that I like to use props. When I finish this water, what can I put in that bottle? Any damn thing I want. You know, depending if there's a bathroom close, you might not want to drink after me. I'm not real sure, but you know, I have to apply it to my life. You know, Bonnie was talking about the steps here recently. Last month I had to do a little 4th step about service. And it's something that I never thought I would do, would be walk away from a service commitment. But through a 4th step in my sponsor, I came to the conclusion that with this job I'm working right now, I have 2 to 4 days a month. And I had to give up a position with the state convention because it came down to committee work or sponsorship. Addicts are dying every day in South Bend. I had to take sponsorship. I have to make myself available for people who need me. Oh, don't call me between this time and this time because I'm at a committee meeting. I'll be there at the convention. I'll be able to help any way I can. Call me, I'll do what I can. But I cannot organize anything with the limited time I have because I have other commitments. You know, this program, you know, we talk about tools in this program. You know, I've been a carpenter a long, long time. My daddy was a carpenter. I started running around with him on jobs when I was 5 years old. I can throw a pile of tools and a bunch of wood down here and say, build this, but it ain't gonna do you no damn good if I don't show you how to use those tools. It's all about the application. You know, we was reading the 3rd step Friday night at my home group meeting, and it mentioned sponsorship in there 5 times. And it mentioned your sponsor can guide you in the application of this step. And anyone who knows me, it's all about the application. How do I use this information? How do I apply this into my life? And my sponsor, he's been around a long time and he's had a lot of life. And he's been through a lot of stuff too. And he can show me how things apply. And I don't always know when he's helping me, because I'll talk to him and I don't realize something's bothering me, but something in the way I talk or in something I say, he realizes something's bothering me and he says, okay, what is it? And I tell this to newcomers when I give them my number, just start calling me and talk to me. It don't have to be all recovery all the time. Just if you get a good joke, call me, tell me. I love jokes. You know, this is a program for living. It states that in the basic text. You know, for years and years, I thought I was living a decent life, but all I was doing was merely existing, sucking up air that somebody else could have used more desperately than me. You know, I can remember sitting around a campfire, getting loaded, talking about what I used to be and how life used to was, and the only thing I was sure I was going to do at that point was have another one, because that's what my life was. Sit around the fire, think I'm doing good because I haven't been arrested yet this year. You know, that's, you know, if that's not unmanageability, I'd like to see your definition, because, you know, I had to take a break every now and then. I figured I'd do it in jail. I'd go detox. My detox is a little different than some other people's. I got chauffeured. usually, and pretty handcuffed. But you know, I have to live the program. Program's about fun to me. I joke. There are bad things that happen. You know, when I came into recovery, I gave up a 6-year relationship. I'm currently on nearly a 4-year relationship. And next month it'll be 2 years and we've been married. So things happen. You know, the day I celebrated 3 years clean, I got home from that meeting and got a phone call that my father died. I didn't have to use. I made 2 phone calls. I called my sponsor and I called a gentleman I sponsored. And the gentleman I sponsored didn't really know what to do with it. So he called someone else. Within a half hour, I had 8 people heading for my house. I said, I'm not home. I got business to take care of. I got to go do this. But they talked to me all night long. You know, that's this program. That's living the program, being there for each other, laughing, joking. If I can do something to put a smile on someone's face, whether it be a joke, a pat on the back. Give a few little kids some glow sticks last night. They just love that. This makes me feel good. You know, fun things. Watching Sean and Ryan or Chelsea row a kayak. How far did you guys kayak? About 5 miles, and then you went past the pier?
In circles.
Yeah, you guys were good at left turns, right turns, backwards. Straight was a little trouble. It was entertaining. But that's living the program, having fun. You know, they was having a riot. I was just having fun watching them. Wish I had a video camera. That was a YouTube moment right there. You know, but for me, living the program is all this stuff. I have to take this stuff that I've learned and apply it. You know, I told you I've been a carpenter a long time. Part of my job is training apprentices. You know, so I got these apprentices. I love working with apprentices, by the way, because they all got nice new stuff. Their stuff ain't all beat up like mine. I get to use their nice stuff that mommy just bought them, and that's like cool. I break someone else's shit again. It's just like working with my dad. So I have to teach them how to use these tools. Because granted, I can use a hammer to drive a screw, but that's not exactly the right tool. You know, and the same thing with the steps. That's why I got a sponsor. I'm still an apprentice in this. Someone has to teach me how to do this. I have to correlate this to my life. How am I living this? You know, and one of the stickers on my hard hat is walk the talk. And I don't care if it's on a job site, if it's in a meeting. One of the things that upsets me the most is someone that wants to talk a build or someone that wants to talk a program, and you see them walk out there and do the same shit they always done. You know, I've always hated hypocrites. And I'm not afraid to piss people off. But if I piss you off, I hope you got a sponsor, and you call the sponsor and say, you know what this guy said about this? Maybe your sponsor will shed some light on it for you. You know, and that's maybe carrying the message. I do this service. I've been involved in hospitals and institutions. You know, I spoke for a group of training substance abuse counselors at Ivy Tech with some people. I have an appointment with a probation officer on Tuesday, and she's been asking me about possibly setting up a informational panel for them. And then she keeps drilling me on, you know, what's this and what's that. And I said, wait a minute, I can only go so far until I can tell you how it's changed my life. I can't tell you much about the program right now because we have guidelines and I want other people there. But if you want, I'll be glad to put a panel together. You know, I love the service. I really do. I love the fellowship. You know, one of the things I miss the most about working this job I'm at, because I'm gone 14 hours a day, is once a week I used to have a group of men over, and some women sometimes. We'd come over, we called it sponsor night. We get together and eat and read the book and do a little paperwork. And I learned a lot from these guys that, according to them, didn't know squat. But I learned from them. You know, one of my sponsor's favorite sayings is, a mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. I feel my job, and especially like the second step, is looking for the signs. Become willing to accept those things as what they are. You know, and it happens all the time. And if I can just let little things go and wait and see what happens with it, then I can gain a little trust. And that trust in whatever power's out there, because if you look at the Just for Today, April 23rd is my clean date, and you look at the heading above that, and it says, some of us believe God to be whatever force is keeping us clean. I'm not really sure who my higher power is. It's evolved over time. I know if I sit down by the water, I feel a little better connection. I don't know, maybe my higher power's a fish. I don't know. But whatever it is, it works for me if I let it. When I start taking my shit back, I start getting this really funny feeling in my stomach. And I don't know why. I get this twinge right there in my ass. Because my mama, that was her favorite thing. She'd say, buddy, come over here so I can kick you in the ass. My mama wasn't much into hitting me. She'd walk by and kick me. And every now and then I get that little twinge, and I've learned to stop and think, what's going on with this? I'm doing something screwy. And I was talking to a guy about that on the job, and my mom's been dead for 7 years now. And her name was Lou. And we went up on the scaffold, and we came down, and right where we stand talking about it was a little piece of aluminum wire shaped in an L, exactly how she made hers. And I'm like, that really works. You know, my higher power speaks through everyone. You know, I have to learn what my character defects are and when they're coming up. See, there's a gentleman here, a lot of you people know him, Paul Sturma. He explained it to me in a way that I could grasp it. That a character defect is something I have. A shortcoming is acting on it. And there's a lot of different people have a lot of different views on it, but that makes sense to me. And I can work with that because it's easy for me to understand. And so when I start feeling funny, when I'm acting on something weird, if I'm starting to get upset about somebody because they're telling me to do something or what are this and that, and I've done many 4 steps on this, and I've always come up with the same conclusion. I'm just envious. Because you can do this, I can't. I got a sister that pisses me off. Because her and her friends get together and they want to have a good time and do whatever, and they call and get their little bit of stuff and have a good time on a Saturday night, and Sunday she's cleaning the house, he's mowing the grass, and I could never do that. I could never call for a little bit of anything. That was beyond my means. I'd call and tell them I had money for a little bit of something, and then I'd try and rob them, which sometimes didn't work out to my favor. But, you know, I have to live this as I speak it, you know. And I try and keep my integrity today. If I say I'm going to do something, I do my damnedest to do it. And if I say I'm doing something a certain way, I try and do it. I try and carry it outside the meetings. And people that's been to a lot of meetings with me know that I say this a lot. It don't matter what you say in the meeting. Because outside that door, I've never seen no one get high in a meeting. Well, people got high in the bathrooms, in the parking lot, on the way to the meeting. But I've never seen nobody get high in a meeting. There's usually somebody will stop them. And I've sat in a lot of meetings with a lot of people who were loaded. But it don't matter what's said in the meeting. If you go out there and do that same shit, it don't matter. I need this stuff a little bit in the meetings, but out there in the world is where I need it. When I leave the door of that facility and I'm on the streets, you know, I left a meeting at Salvation Army one time, and a guy comes stumbling around the corner. Couldn't hardly even walk. Asked me for a cigarette. I gave him my last cigarette and thanked him. Because I'm not him today. Not that many years ago I was. You know, it's just a difference in life. You know, Bonnie was talking about fixes and changes. That's what I got out of part of that, about changing the way you eat. I need to do that. I lost a little weight too, Bonnie. Because my boss won't let me take a box of donuts out on the unit. I brought it up to the union steward, and he told me to shut up and leave. Yeah, I don't get representation like I used to. But, you know, change is what we do. What's that old saying? What's the only constant? Change. If I don't keep changing, because things change. You know, I tell people my legal problems didn't come from what I'd done. It's because they changed the laws. I didn't used to get in trouble for this stuff. They changed the law to make it illegal. That's wrong. I need a memo on that. you know, but I have to keep up with this. If I do the same thing I always done, expecting different results, that's insanity, right? It says that in the second step. If I do the same thing knowing what the result's going to be, that's stupid. And I've done that for years. You know, I say, hey, okay, I'm tired of crashing my head into that wall hoping I'm going to get through. What can I do different? I'll get a helmet. It didn't work. I just changed a little bit. I had to stop. You know what? I'm trying to put my head through that wall right there. Damn, I'll try the door this time. Hey, that works. Because someone told me that'd be a little easier. You know? Bonnie talked about when she first went to area. And you know, it's a beautiful thing. And yeah, there's some unspiritual moments happen at area. Anyone who's ever been to a service meeting knows there's a few unspiritual moments. But some of the people I've met in area service, you know, Derek, Drew, Bonnie, all these people that are so influential in my life and in my recovery, I've met these people in service commitments. And that's why I go back. You know, that's why my network, I celebrated 5 years clean in April, and I got phone calls from Alaska, California, Texas, Florida. I got phone calls from here all over the country. Because through service and going to conventions and getting to know people, I was able to expand my network. If I take a job out of town, I don't have to worry about where I'm staying usually. I just got to make a few phone calls. Somebody will put me up for a few days. Somebody will get me to meetings. Hey, I'm here. I don't know how to get to a meeting. Someone will swoop in and grab your ass. You know? And that's living the program. You know, the basic text tells me I cannot apply the program to my life. I have to apply my life to the program. And that's why I talk about correlating my life to the program. I can find things that I've done all my life and realize that that's actually the program worded differently. I just don't use dope in doing it. You know, to me, you know, it also says in the literature that the first step towards recovery is not using. So don't beat up abstinence if that's the best you can do. I think it says 13 times in a basic text to the best of our ability. Sometimes my ability is not to be real spiritual. You catch me on the right day, I ain't the most spiritual fella you're going to meet. I'm going to cuss you out. I might make an amends later. But I do that 10th step on that and say, well, that was wrong. The program also tells me I can make mistakes and learn from them. I'm free to make new mistakes. It's a program for learn. As long as I'm open-minded and learn from a mistake, I'm going to get a little bit better. I don't have to make that same mistake all over again. I was nearly 3 years clean. I got arrested for driving on a lifetime suspended license. That was a very humbling experience. You have to sit down 5 sponsees and tell them what you did and why it was wrong, and you would have no ill feelings if they went to another sponsor. You know, that's something that's a little hard to do. Yeah, but that's what happened. You know, so I pretty much take life as it comes. I apply the program in everything I do. You know, I can walk the talk. If I don't have an answer, I know someone who does. I have people, you know, if I got a question about a tradition, just FYI, if you got a question about a tradition, call Derek. He'll help you out in a kind, loving way. You know, concepts, I use them in my life, you know. And I explained to it, I was sponsoring a gentleman who was at a convention in Fort Wayne a couple of years ago when ISNAC was there, and he wanted to buy me dinner. He wanted to show me how much he appreciated me, buy me dinner. This guy didn't have the money. So I pulled out the 11 concept on him. I said, you're not managing that responsibly. I said, dude, 50-cent hard hat sticker. Damn, give it to me. I love those. That's the best you can do. That's what I need, you know. And just so you know, there's no greater joy than when someone comes up and says, you know what, I like what you hear. I like what you say. I see it in the way you do things. Will you be my sponsor? Something happens inside when that happens. The first time anybody who sponsors people knows that the first time somebody asks you to be their sponsor, unless you're like up to here with ego, is like, whoa, that fear starts kicking in. You got to call your sponsor and say, I don't know, I'm not ready for this, you know. And usually the answer is, well, you're ready if they ask you. You know, it's like coming up and speaking. You know, it is part of what we do. I carry the message in words. I carry my message in actions. I try and do what I say. I don't try and mince words. I don't try and people please. A lot of people like me. A lot of people don't. You know, one thing about getting older, my parents always told me I must respect my elders. The amount of people I need to respect is thinning out. It happens. It's kind of funny, you know. I used to be the young guy on the crew. Now I'm the old guy on the crew. I don't have to respect no one there, except I do got somebody over me. You know, I have to learn my place. You know, and it was explained to me that that's humility, knowing my place, not groveling, just knowing my place, knowing my capabilities, my assets and my liabilities. If I can keep my assets strong and my liabilities in check, that's what that 7-step does for me. It keeps my liabilities in check. Lets me know when I'm about to go off. I know I got this defect, and I know I may cuss you out. Let's hope I can stop it there, because in the past I would start throwing things. Every now and then I do. You know, one of the hardest amends I ever had to make was to the area service committee, because I went off, threw shit, walked out. That was a hard amends to make. I had my sponsor on the phone as soon as I got to the house, and he's talking to me, and he's like, I knew it was coming. I try not to have reservations, because I catch myself sometimes going to a meeting, whether it be a service meeting or a regular meeting, saying, oh, so-and-so's going to be there, they're going to say this, and this is how I'm going to respond. That's a reservation in my book. You know, I try and live my program to the best of my ability. You know, I had a thing, and we had a lot of talk about this at ISMAC. I talked to several people. I went to the CRC in July or January, and I had a toothache. Killer toothache. It was killing me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Almost to tears. I found that spearmint gum helped it. I went to a dentist, and they said, okay, we can have this taken out by oral surgeon. He comes in once a month. Okay. 2 months go by, I never made the appointment to have the tooth taken out, but then the tooth starts hurting so bad, spearmint gum didn't help no more. Aspirin didn't help no more. I thought about going to the emergency room. Emergency room will give you painkillers. In my mind, and I can't say this for anybody else, but to me that would have been a relapse. Because I had opportunity for 2 months to get the problem taken care of. I tried to cover it, and I covered it well. Salt water gargles, everything I could think of to make my tooth quit hurting, but I didn't come to the solution. So finally I went and had them teeth taken care of, and the solution was averted. But that's how I think. It's just an addict named Bud. I think a little differently. You know, like I said earlier, my favorite step of all of them is the 12th step, because I get to use everything. I get to apply this stuff in all my affairs, not just when it's convenient, not just when I'm in a meeting, not just when a bunch of newcomers come in the room and I get to talk big shit and make them think that, look at me now. Look at this time I got. What am I doing out there? Am I having a good time on the lake, even rowing in circles? Hey, you're still on the lake rowing. You know, am I having a good time? You know, funny story this morning. Watch going back to that tree. There's some killer rabbits back there. It was almost this big. Come out the weeds, tried to attack my wife. Oh my God, about had to fight it off with a stick. But those are the things that happen in recovery. You know, I've seen people come, I've seen people go. I've been to funerals. I've been to funerals of people who died clean. I've been to funerals of people who died dirty. And I'm going to close with my favorite story on it. It's not my favorite story because I hate funerals. but it's a good story. April 6th, 2009, Paul Sturman was killed in a motorcycle accident. June 8th, 2009, Brett Kay overdosed. They found him in his bathroom alone with a needle in his arm. June 11th, there was a funeral for both of these gentlemen. 8 people showed up at Brett's funeral. One of them wanted to know who had the $50 for the dope that killed him. There were several hundred at Paul's to remember this man who lived the program. And I ask myself every time turmoil comes up, I know I'm going to die. I'm not going to get out of this life alive. Which addict do I want to be? And I think about that. And I base my decision on that. And that's how I live this program. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Bud and Bonnie. We are out of time, so could somebody come up and read the Just for the Day card?